Grandma and Grandpa never stopped planting when summer ended. Fall was their season to tuck hardy crops into the soil, the kind that could take a frost and still come up strong. Some of these crops were the backbone of family gardens that carried folks through hard times, and many of them are still with us today, and they grow just as well now as they did back then. If you've ever wondered what your grandparents put in the ground before winter, here are 20 old-time crops you can still plant in fall before the frost. Bloomsdale long-standing spinach. Grandma often planted Bloomsdale long-standing spinach when the weather cooled. This old heirloom, first introduced in the 1800s, became a staple because it held up better in the garden than other kinds. Its crinkled dark green leaves stood strong against chilly nights, and the plants kept producing even after light frosts. Families loved it because spinach was one of the earliest greens to harvest, rich in vitamins when other foods were scarce. Many remembered bowls of creamed spinach at the supper table or tender leaves tossed into salads before winter set in. The variety's name said it all. It stood long in the field without bolting, giving gardeners a steady supply. Bloomsdale was a simple but dependable crop, one that carried forward through generations of fall planting. Lacinato kale, Dinosaur Kale. Grandma knew kale could handle the cold, and Lacinato was often her choice. This old Italian variety, sometimes called Dinosaur kale, has been grown for centuries and was valued for its toughness and flavor. Its long, dark blue-green leaves held up to frost, and in fact, the flavor grew sweeter after a chill. Families often harvested it well into winter, cutting leaves as needed for soups, stews, and hearty sides. Many remembered the texture of its wrinkled leaves simmering on the stove alongside potatoes or beans. Lacinato was reliable, giving steady harvests when other crops were long gone. For gardeners who wanted food past the first frost, this kale was a dependable friend, proving that some of the oldest varieties still earned their place in fall gardens. Georgia Southern Collards. Grandma's garden almost always had a row of collards, and Georgia Southern was one of the best-known kinds. This heirloom, grown since the 1800s, spread wide with big, tender leaves that stood strong against cool weather. Collards were treasured in the South, but they found a place in family gardens everywhere because they grew when other greens had faded. After the first frost, their flavor mellowed, turning sweeter and more enjoyable at the table. Families often remembered big pots of collards simmering slowly with salt pork or ham bones, filling the kitchen with a rich, hearty smell. Collards were dependable, feeding families well into the winter months. Georgia Southern proved that simple greens could carry households through lean times with both nourishment and comfort. Southern Giant Curled Mustard Greens. When Grandma planted mustard greens in the fall, she often chose Southern Giant Curled. This variety, with its frilly bright green leaves, came up quickly and kept producing even as the weather cooled. It was a staple during the Depression, providing families with filling greens when money was tight. The flavor was bold and peppery, a taste that woke up plain meals of cornbread or beans. After a frost, the leaves grew tenderer, making them easier to enjoy. Children often recalled steaming bowls of mustard greens served with vinegar at the table. These plants grew with little fuss, thriving where other crops struggled. Southern Giant Curled Mustard was proof that even the humblest greens could play a big part in keeping families fed through fall and winter. Purple Top White Globe Turnip. Grandma relied on turnips because they gave her two crops in one. The Purple Top White Globe was the variety she trusted most, with its round roots and leafy green tops. Planted in late summer or early fall, it grew quickly and was ready to harvest before the ground froze. The roots stored well in cellars, where they stayed firm through winter, while the greens were cooked fresh as a side dish. Families often remembered pots of turnip greens simmering with onions or pork, a cheap but hearty addition to the table. The roots themselves were mashed, roasted, or added to stews, stretching meals when food was scarce. Purple top turnips were reliable, thrifty, and a true staple in fall gardens for generations. French breakfast radish. Grandma liked radishes because they came up fast, and the French breakfast was a favorite heirloom. Its long red and white roots were mild and crisp, ready to eat in just a few weeks. This meant families could enjoy fresh vegetables late into fall, even as the days shortened. Radishes were eaten raw with a pinch of salt. sliced into salads, or served alongside bread and butter. Children remembered pulling them straight from the ground, rinsing them quickly at the pump, and crunching them on the spot. The French breakfast variety had been grown since the 1800s, valued for its quick harvest and dependable flavor. It was the kind of simple crop that added cheer to the garden and freshness to the table when most other foods were stored away. Detroit dark red beet Grandma's cellar almost always held jars of pickled beets, and many of them came from Detroit dark red. This variety, dating back to the late 1800s, was loved for its smooth, round roots and deep crimson color. It thrived in the cool weather of fall and could be stored in sand or straw to last through the winter. Families valued it because it gave both roots and greens, both rich in flavor and nutrients. Children remembered their hands turning red after helping to peel beets for supper, the sharp scent of vinegar filling the kitchen when jars were sealed. Detroit dark red was dependable, hardy, and easy to grow, which made it a common sight in gardens across America. It was a beet family's trusted year after year. Danvers half-long carrot. When Grandma planted carrots for fall, Danvers half-long was often her choice. Bred in Massachusetts in the 1870s, this variety was designed to handle heavier soils, which meant nearly any gardener could count on a good harvest. Its roots were broad-shouldered, deep orange, and stored well through the winter when packed in sand. Families remembered pulling carrots from the cellar months after harvest, still crisp and ready for stews or roasts. The flavor was sweetened by the cool weather, making them even more enjoyable at the table. Children often recalled sneaking raw carrots from the kitchen baskets and crunching them while doing chores. Danvers was reliable, practical, and versatile, the kind of carrot that kept families supplied long after the garden outside had gone quiet. American purple top Rutabaga Grandma often called rutabagas her keeping roots, and American purple top was the variety she trusted most. With its yellow flesh and purple-tinged shoulders, it grew larger than turnips and stored even longer. Planted in late summer, it thrived in the cool days of fall and only grew sweeter after a frost. Families cooked it mashed with butter, diced into soups, or roasted alongside meats. It was filling, hearty food that stretched through the coldest months when fresh produce was scarce. Children remembered the earthy smell rising from pots of rutabaga simmering on the stove, a reminder of gardens long gone to sleep. This dependable crop helped many households endure hard winters, proving itself year after year as a true staple of the fall garden. Black-seeded Simpson lettuce. For fall salads, Grandma often turned to black-seeded Simpson, a variety that had been grown in American gardens since the 1850s. Its light green, crinkled leaves came up quickly and handled cool weather with ease. Planted late in the season, it provided tender greens when most vegetables were being packed away in storage. Families valued its mild flavor and crisp texture, perfect for sandwiches or tossed with vinegar. Children remembered running out to the garden to cut a bowlful before supper, the leaves still cool from the autumn air. It was one of the first lettuces many homesteads grew, and it stayed popular because it was so dependable. Black-seeded Simpson was simple, hearty, and steady, a reminder of how small crops could still make meals brighter. Early Jersey Wakefield cabbage. Grandma often planted early Jersey Wakefield for its compact size and reliability. This pointed heirloom cabbage, first introduced in the 1840s, fit neatly into small garden plots and matured quickly in the cool days of fall. Its firm, tender heads were easy to cook and stored well for weeks in the cellar. Families used it for slaws, boiled dinners, or hearty soups that stretched simple meals through chilly evenings. Children remembered the sharp crunch of fresh cabbage cut right before supper. Wakefield became a favorite because it produced steady harvests without taking up much space, and it gave gardeners food before the deeper cold arrived. For households relying on every square foot, this cabbage was a dependable friend that always had a place in fall gardens. Fordhook Giant Swiss Chard. Swiss chard was a familiar sight in Grandma's rows, and Fordhook Giant was the variety she trusted. Its broad, white stems and glossy green leaves stood strong even as frost touched the garden. Families cooked the leaves like spinach, or used the stalks in place of celery, stretching meals when options were limited. It grew back after cutting, which meant a single patch could feed the family for weeks. Children remembered the earthy smell of chard simmering on the stove, mixed with onions or bacon. It was filling, nourishing food that asked for little care in return. Fordhook giant earned its name honestly, producing leaves so large they filled baskets. In fall gardens, it stood as a steady provider, offering both versatility and endurance as the season cooled. Evergreen hardy white bunching. Onion grandma always liked to keep onions close at hand, and evergreen hardy white was the one she planted in fall. These bunching onions, sometimes called scallions, came up quickly and endured the chill with little trouble. They never formed large bulbs, but produced clusters of slender stalks that were easy to pull and use. Families relied on them to flavor soups, stews, and roasts when stronger onions were gone from storage. Children remembered snipping them fresh from the garden, their sharp scent clinging to hands for hours. These onions were simple but dependable, giving gardeners a steady harvest without much fuss. Evergreen hardy white kept the kitchen stocked with fresh flavor late into the season, proof that even small crops could carry big importance through fall. Chesnok Red Garlic. When fall came, Grandma always tucked garlic cloves into the soil, knowing they would rest through winter and sprout strong in spring. Chesnok Red, a hardy variety from the Republic of Georgia, was one she favored for its rich flavor and reliable growth. Its bulbs stored well for months, keeping families supplied with garlic long after harvest. In the kitchen, it roasted to a sweet, mellow taste that seasoned everything from meats to vegetables. Children remembered the smell of garlic sizzling in pans, filling the house with warmth before supper. Planting in fall meant bulbs were ready the next summer, a cycle that kept gardens and cellars full year after year. Chesnok Red proved that even the smallest cloves could carry a household through the seasons. French red shallots. Grandma often planted shallots in fall, knowing they would divide and grow into clusters by the next summer. French red was a favorite for its rosy skins and mild, rich flavor. These small bulbs stored well in braids or baskets, lasting long after harvest when other alliums had sprouted. Families used them to season soups, roasts, and gravies, adding depth to even the simplest meals. Children remembered the shine of red skins piled high in the pantry, ready whenever needed. Shallots were easy to grow, asking only for a place in the fall garden and patience through winter. When spring returned, they pushed up green shoots that promised another harvest. French red shallots were proof of how tradition and taste worked hand in hand in the old homestead garden. Roquette Arugula. Grandma sometimes planted arugula, which she called roquette, as a quick green for fall. This old European heirloom thrived in cool weather and came up fast, giving peppery leaves long before frost set in. Its sharp flavor added life to simple meals of bread, cheese, or beans. Families often cut it young for salads or let it grow larger for cooking. Children remembered its bite, surprising them at the table, a taste that stood out from milder lettuces. Arugula was easy to sow, needing only a patch of soil and regular picking. It was a green that asked for little, but gave plenty in return. In the fall garden, roquette was a steady reminder that even the simplest crops could bring excitement to everyday meals. Broadleaf Batavian endive. Grandma sometimes grew endive, an old European green that carried into American gardens. The broadleaf Batavian variety was valued for its crunchy texture and slightly bitter taste, which mellowed after a light frost. Families often used it in fall salads or cooked it down like spinach. Its broad leaves made generous harvests, and it grew well even when other greens had faded. Children remembered their parents mixing endive with vinegar or cream dressings, turning it into a dish that brightened the table. It was not as common as lettuce, but it held a special place in gardens where variety mattered. Broadleaf Batavian showed how old-world crops adapted to new homesteads, giving families a taste of tradition that lasted through the cooling days of fall. Mache corn salad. Grandma sometimes planted mache, also known as corn salad, when fall arrived. This little green was treasured in old European gardens and made its way into American plots as well. It thrived in cool weather, producing small spoon-shaped leaves that were tender and mild. Families harvested it well into winter, sometimes even brushing away snow to pick a handful. It was eaten fresh in salads or added to soups for extra nutrition. Children remembered its soft texture compared to hardier greens, a gentle flavor that balanced stronger foods on the plate. Mache asked for very little care and rewarded gardeners with food long after other crops had vanished. It was one of those quiet plants that earned its keep by showing up when needed most. Hollow-crown parsnips were a familiar root in Grandma's garden, and hollow crown was the variety she trusted. This heirloom dated back to the 1800s and grew long white roots that stored well in the cellar. Families valued parsnips because they sweetened after frost, making them a welcome treat in winter meals. Roasted with potatoes, mashed with butter, or added to stews, they offered both flavor and nourishment. Children remembered the earthy smell as parsnips were pulled from the ground late in the season, their roots clinging to heavy soil. They were not the fanciest crop, but they were steady and reliable. Hollow crown kept families supplied with food when choices were few, proving why it remained a staple in fall gardens for generations. Turkey red winter wheat. Grandpa often sowed turkey red winter wheat in the fall, knowing it would sprout before frost and rest under the snow until spring. This heritage grain, brought to America by Mennonite immigrants in the 1870s, was known for its strength and flavor. Families depended on it for flour that made hearty breads and biscuits, the kind that filled stomachs and lasted on the table. Children remembered watching the green shoots poke through the soil before winter, then seeing fields turn golden the next summer. It was a crop tied closely to survival, turning harvests into the daily bread of farm families. Turkey red became a symbol of endurance, showing how a simple planting in fall could carry households through the year ahead. These old crops carried families through hard times, giving food when the days grew short and the nights turned cold. Grandma and Grandpa knew what to plant and when, and many of their choices are still the best for fall gardens today. If you enjoyed learning about these heirloom crops, give this video a hype and subscribe so we can keep these traditions alive for the next generation of gardeners.